It is obvious that humans are carnivores and cannibals. However, the capability of totalitarian regimes to decimate fellow human beings is literally 100,000 times stronger than that of democracies, even when democracies go to war while totalitarians sit still and decimate their people in gulags. Democracies are also good at self-deprecation and lessons learning. Right now, democracies are on the verge of the hard choice to help the Russian people who will very soon starve once all over again, at least 3 times in the last century. And each time so far, America helped while being a state whom the Kremlin designated as enemy number 1. A piece of reflection about the minds battered by propaganda. This piece of reflection is taken from Russian journalist Dmitry Nekrasov. So it will be a long quote. From the comments, I learned with amazement that Russia also won the Afghan war. Well, in the sense of losing, but better than the Americans. And especially, of course, the general conviction of our compatriots is striking that the USSR built a lot of things in Afghanistan and developed everything there, while the Americans bombed a lot and did not build anything, although the reality, as usual, is exactly the opposite. Let's start with civilian casualties. It is clear that there can be no exact data here, but even estimates of losses are indicative. Estimates of civilian casualties over the 10 years of the Soviet presence range between 500,000 and 2 million. The most frequently encountered figure is 1 million civilian deaths. All estimates of civilian casualties over 20 years of American occupation are measured in the range of tens of thousands of people. The most agitated human rights activists talk about a range of 40 to 50,000 people in the whole 20 years. Thus, the lowest estimate of civilian casualties from Soviet actions is more than 10 times higher than the highest estimates of civilian casualties from US actions. And this despite the fact that the USSR entered the place where peace reigned, and the USA went to where the civil war had been going on for more than 20 years. An indicative fact: during the Soviet occupation, the population of Afghanistan decreased by almost 20%, and during the rule of the Americans, it grew by 50%. And this fluctuation of the population is largely due to the fact that when the Russians came, millions of Afghans left the country, and when the Soviets withdrew the troops, some of the immigrants returned. With the Americans, it was exactly the opposite. When the Americans came en masse, the Afghans did not emigrate. Emigration began after the Americans left. By the way, I don't remember anything about the crowds of Afghans fleeing to the USSR on the armor of the 40th Army. Although from the data above, it is quite obvious which of the two invaders bombed more and with whom the Afghans liked to live more, but let's go through the infrastructure facilities. As usual, the Soviet statistics are in trouble, but even in propaganda texts about the great help of the Soviet people, phrases such as more than 140 objects of economic and social infrastructure built by the Soviet Union for the Afghan people are usually found. You try to figure it out. You see from serious ones, a couple of bridges, a couple of tunnels, one hydroelectric power station built before the invasion and not for free, one university, and that's all. Taking into account schools, hospitals, and other things, it is clear that we're talking about a maximum of a few hundred non-military facilities. The Americans and other developed countries in Afghanistan have built 13,000 schools in 20 years. The number of school students during this time increased from 0.8 to 6.5 million people, and literacy increased from 8% to 43%. Higher educational institutions, instead of one built by the USSR, the Americans had built 31 by 2012. Their number has reached over 60 by 2020. The number of university students in 2001 was 10,000. In 2015, 300,000 people. I did not find other data, but only USAID built more than 600 clinics by 2015 alone. And there were also other developed countries and international organizations, and another 5 years, so the roundup will be good for 1,000 medical facilities. Infant mortality has decreased significantly. Life expectancy has increased by 9 years. Artesian wells were drilled in thousands of villages, and this is a really important problem for Afghanistan. A decent water supply system was built in large cities. The percentage of the population with access to clean water increased from 16% to 89%. And dozens, if not hundreds of settlements, city halls and police buildings have been built from scratch. Everyone saw the rather modern building of the Kabul airport on footage of the flight. There were about a dozen of them built, etc. This is just an endless list, and the scale of American construction, well, it simply cannot be compared with any Soviet construction. The difference is 100 times more. And God bless them, Americans and Afghans. I am annoyed by this constantly repeating pattern of patriotic Russians. Even without special state propaganda, even about the events that happened before our eyes and not 70 years ago, a lot of people come from a completely invented picture of reality in which we again defeated everyone and they are bad in the West. They only bomb.